Welcome to the Midweek Edition of Legal AF with your hosts, Michael Popok and Karen Friedman Agnifilo, sunny Karen Friedman Agnifilo for those that can watch us on YouTube. We have an action-packed deep dive into the most consequential and influential issues at the intersection of law and politics. At the midweek, we've specially curated this show for you, Karen and me, and here we go. We're going to go right into her old stomping grounds. What is going on at the Manhattan DA's office? Looks like we've awakened a sleepy giant for some reason. And we got two issues that we're going to dive into with Karen. Who better to guide us through this as a spirit guide than Karen Friedman Agnifilo? We're going to talk about Michael Cohen going in earlier this week to be interviewed publicly. Everybody knows about it. He even went on the MeidasTouch network and gave a news-breaking interview to our co-anchor and partner, Ben Meisalas, about what happened with Stormy Daniels again, as if we don't already know. But the new prosecutors on the team with Alvin Bragg wanted to have a formal meeting, wanted to debrief and find out how Michael Cohen could help them about the $130,000 payment that was made way back when, first by Michael Cohen and then reimbursed by Donald Trump to pay off Stormy Daniels while candidate Trump ran for office, and whether there is a New York crime, a New York felony as compared to misdemeanor that may be implicated and that Alvin Bragg's team is looking at now. We'll talk about that with Karen Friedman Agnifilo, and then we're going to talk about we've had a lot of conversation, I'll put it nicely, and chat off of our and Karen's Alvin Bragg interview last week. Mr. Bragg, kind enough to come on the show. And there's, of course, two sides to every story. And one side of that story is two now former prosecutors that were especially assigned to the case by Karen's former boss, Cy Vance. And that was Carrie Dunn and Mark Pomerantz. And Mark Pomerantz has decided to write all about it, or write a tell-all in a memoir published by Simon & Schuster coming out next month, which is called People versus Donald Trump. We've always wanted to have that in a caption. And Mark Pomerantz has gone one better and wants to write a book about it. But the Manhattan DA's office is not happy about it and has written a letter as a precursor to a possible lawsuit. And we'll talk about that because they think Mark Pomerantz may reveal the secret sauce or comment inappropriately about witnesses and evidence about an ongoing criminal investigation. Because yes, Mr. Pomerantz left the case, but the case didn't leave the office and is still going on. And we'll talk about it from at least an ex-prosecutor's perspective, to the extent that Karen can talk about that. And then we'll shift gears from the Manhattan DA's office and we'll head south on 95 to Miami and to Tallahassee, Florida, and find out why Ron DeSantis is going to trial for his migrant dump-off stunt, where he took Texas migrants, not even ones in Florida, who showed up yearning to breathe free, yearning to be Americans, and instead he put them on transportation and dumped them off as a stunt in different places like Massachusetts and the vice president's house and all of that. And he got sued over it by a Democratic state senator from South Florida. And the Leon County, which is up in Tallahassee, judge said, Mr. DeSantis, you're going to trial on this. We're going to find out whether you violated the Florida Constitution, the Florida rules and statutes related to how laws get passed and how appropriations get spent. You spent $12 million on this stunt. Let's find out if that violated the Florida Constitution. And while we're at it, let's find out if it violated the federal U.S. Constitution and the right of the U.S. government to be supreme in the areas of immigration. And then we're going to wrap it up with the Proud Boys and their trial that's going on in front of Judge Kelly in Washington, D.C. at present. Started earlier in the week. We had opening statements. We'll talk about the defense angle, which seems to be trying to take a page out of the losing book of Stuart Rhodes. I don't know why you'd follow Stuart Rhodes, one of the Oath Keepers. He already got convicted of the very thing that your clients are now also being tried for. I don't know why you thought that was a good idea, but we'll talk about their openings. We'll talk about how the case is progressing from both a defense lawyer's perspective and a former prosecutor's perspective in Karen. Karen, I'm breathless already. How are you in your sunny locale?
I'm great. Traveling for business, but always have time for LegalAF. So super excited to be here. I love the new glasses, Popok.
Thank you. Now that you're one of the few. You're one of a handful that likes them. But it does allow me to see you clearly on YouTube on our live, and I know that you're in a nice sunny place, and I'm happy about that. But once again, demonstrating that we don't sleep at LegalAF, and we don't sleep at the MeidasTouch network. Our producer certainly hasn't slept. Thank you, Brett Meiselas, for stepping in and helping us with the show tonight. So let's kick it off. Everybody doesn't want to know about where you're at and about my new eyewear. They want to know about what's going on in your office and talk about Breathless. So let me frame it, and then I'm just going to sit back and let you talk about it to the best that you can. Here's what we now know, and we know this also from a breaking story that the MeidasTouch network was able to bring to you through Michael Cohen, our fellow podcaster, who, when he wasn't a podcaster, also went to jail because of his involvement with Donald Trump, and got out of jail because he was retaliated against when he tried to publish a book. So all of this comes full circle with Michael Cohen being brought in publicly to have, well, it's publicly because Michael told everybody about it, and have an interview with the Manhattan DA's office with what appears to be a new set of prosecutors that have been brought in, not Dunn and Pomerantz, who left last February very noisily. We'll talk about that next. But Alvin Bragg's hand-picked prosecutors for this, and they're getting back down to the nitty-gritty on Stormy Daniels, the $130,000 hush payment, and back behind the scenes, this is where you can really bring it home. What is the crime, the felony in New York State that they may be looking at related to the hush money, as compared to, listen, you don't have to comment on it if you can't, but the reporting is that Cy Vance took one look at the hush money issue and sort of said, I don't see how I ramp it up from misdemeanor to felony, and I'm going to go a different direction. At least that's the reporting. Could be totally wrong. I don't have insider knowledge. I didn't work in the office, but you did. So let's turn to you. Let's start with Michael Cohen going in. What does it mean? What happened? And what do you think it means for the future about whether Alvin Bragg and his team of prosecutors is going to actually bring a felony prosecution against Donald Trump for the Stormy Daniels hush money payment?
So Alvin Bragg has said now for a long time that there is an active and ongoing investigation into Donald Trump, and at least one, and there could be several. But unfortunately, because most investigations happen behind closed doors, a lot of people thought or think that nothing is going on. But I think what we're seeing is Alvin Bragg is clearly still investigating and potentially bringing charges against Donald Trump. And he confirmed it when he came on to our special edition interview podcast last week. And he said, yes, there's an active ongoing investigation, multiple investigations. And when I say multiple, I mean multiple different crimes, because you follow the facts wherever they lead. And sometimes they bleed in together to each other. Sometimes they're separate. And this came on the heels of the really astounding conviction that he got against the Trump Corporation and the Trump payroll. And Michael Cohen reported yesterday that he had met with the DA's office again, because we all know he had met with the DA's office, the Manhattan DA's office, I think he said 13 times over a year ago. And this was the first time, though, he's met with the new administration with Alvin Bragg, because last time it was Cy Vance and, as you said, Carrie Dunn and Mark Pomerantz. And he didn't tell us a lot because he promised them he would keep it quiet. I give him a lot of credit for that. I don't think you should talk about a pending investigation. It can actually hurt the investigation. And this actually bleeds nicely into our next topic, the book you mentioned that Mark Pomerantz is writing. And I have very mixed feelings about that for the reason that I'm just saying. So I give Michael Cohen a lot of credit for the fact that he is honoring their request to not speak about it publicly, because frankly, he can talk publicly if he wanted to, but they asked him not to because it does potentially impact the case. And I respect him for doing it. He said that he spoke to them for about 2.5 hours. And that's about it. He wouldn't even tell us who the prosecutors are that he met with. So I tried to figure it out through my own back channels. The DA's office wouldn't confirm for me or tell me or give me any indication of who the prosecutors are that he met with. But I believe my best guess, just from what I can
Here
glean
comes
from
breaking
everything.
news. Karen Friedman's going to break the news here.
I could be wrong, though. Let's just say, but my view, what I believe,
you rarely are. Who is it?
I believe that there's an executive ADA who was brought in for gun violence prevention. His name is Peter Pope. And Peter Pope is a long-term public servant. And he worked for Eliot Spitzer when he was governor. He was a criminal defense attorney. He also worked in the Manhattan DA's office for years. He's just been he was at the New York Attorney General's office in various roles. He worked for something called the New York City School Construction Authority. He's done a lot of different things, and he's a very senior, very well respected prosecutor. And although he has a lot of experience in gun violence, and that's what he knows, a lot of us, kind of raised our eyebrows a little bit that he'd come over just for that. So I believe he's also the lead prosecutor on the Stormy Daniels hush money Trump case. I believe that's what he's working on. And if that's the case, he's really an exceptional, high-level person who I think, again, you wouldn't attract someone like Peter Pope unless it was something really big. So I think he is supervising the case. And the other person who I think is on the case is a senior investigative prosecutor. Her name is Catherine McCaw. And Catherine McCaw is very smart, very respected. I think she went to Harvard. I think she was a clerk, just a very good, smart lawyer who works in the investigation division, which means she's very experienced in white collar crime. And interestingly, she was the lead prosecutor on the case that against Anna Sorkin that the Netflix series Inventing Anna was based on. So,
which I know is a favorite of yours. I know that was a favorite show of yours.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great show. So she's first of all, she has a lot of experience dealing with both tricky defendants because Anna Sorkin was not easy. She has a lot of experience dealing with high-profile, tricky defendants for that same reason, and obviously Trump is Anna Sorkin on steroids. But she can handle that with Peter, and those are the two that I believe are on the case. And if that's the case, I will tell you, I don't know why people don't believe Alvin Bragg that he has a pending investigation that he's looking at, but it is clear to me, you don't put serious prosecutors and have them spend all of their career, or I should say all of their time, doing this. And certainly they wouldn't do it if it wasn't a real prosecution, just like Jack Smith. He's another one. If there was no, this isn't lip service. This is people who are genuinely looking at this and taking a hard look at whether or not you can prosecute these cases.
Let me ask you a question.
What are the crimes?
Well, yeah. Well, first, Brett's going to put up a cryon on the bottom that says KFA predicts Peter Pope and Catherine McCaw are the prosecutors, which I love. Whether it's true or not, we'll find out. But it certainly is your best guess. And I can't think of anybody making a better guess. So, serious prosecutors for a serious crime. The crime of false records, which is I paid hush money to Stormy Daniels, but in the Trump Organization books, I listed it as some sort of other business expense or something like that, just so we frame the question, is a misdemeanor in New York. Yeah, it's filing
a false, it's falsifying business records or filing a false instrument. And it's a misdemeanor.
But to up it to felony, you got to have a second crime that's being covered up.
It has to be,
right?
it has to be concealing another crime, exactly, to make it a felony. That is
so.
Correct.
What do you think? Well, first of all, and you could say I can't talk about it, but I'm going to ask it because everybody on our podcast knows you work for Cy Vance. Do you know why Cy, at least if the reporting is correct, didn't think they had the second crime in order to elevate it to a felony?
So I think at the time that he was looking at it, you have to remember there was a long, protracted battle to try and get Trump's tax returns. And in fact, there was litigation for years and years and years. Because for example, he paid this money back to Michael Cohen that we know. So he had Michael Cohen pay Stormy Daniels, and then he reimbursed Michael Cohen. If he then cooked his taxes, cooked the books, if you will, so that it looked like that was a business offense or a business write-off, which it actually would not count as one, then that could be considered a tax crime. And so that could increase it to a felony. But if you recall, Cy Vance didn't have those tax returns for a long time because Donald Trump was fighting that. And that wove its way up and down the state courts and the federal courts, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, where actually Carrie Dunn was the lawyer who argued this before the United States Supreme Court, and they were able to obtain Donald Trump's tax returns. Now, even though I was in the office at the time that we received the tax returns, I never saw them because we kept those, or they kept those, and continue to, I assume, under incredible lock and key secret, certainly, treated them like they were classified, top secret, compartmentalized, whatever. Like they handled it so that nobody would have access to that unless you needed to, and I didn't need to at the time. And so I never even saw them, but I would imagine that at this point, and they were many, 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 many pages because there were many, many years. So I imagine at this point, they have gone through them and perhaps they have uncovered something that makes it a felony, or perhaps not, and it's still a misdemeanor. Interestingly, and I asked Alvin Bragg about this, DA Bragg, when he was on the show, I said, my understanding or my calculation of things is, and this is just based on things that I've read and talked to people about, is that the statute of limitations is running in May of this year. And some people might say, well, I don't understand, because a felony statute of limitations is 5 years and a misdemeanor statute of limitations is 2 years in New York, which means you have to commence charges within either 5 years if it's a felony or 2 years if it's a misdemeanor. And one would say, yes, but these payments occurred, the hush money payment occurred in 2015, and Donald Trump paid Michael Cohen back over a series.
2018.
Yeah, over a series.
Yeah.
I think it was 2016, but whatever it was.
All right, okay.
I think it was 2015 into 2016. And so the statute of limitations would have run on both. But there is an exception in the New York law that allows for a tolling of the statute of limitations, or a pressing pause on the statute of limitations. And that is when a defendant, is out of the jurisdiction for a continuous period of time. So basically, if he's being charged, they're going to have to do a math equation and prove, and look, he was out of the jurisdiction. He was out of the state for a period of time because he was in Washington, D.C. while he was president. And
that would be breaking news.
Sorry. I don't know where that came from or why that came out of my mouth. But anyway, but between his time in Washington, D.C. and in Bedminster, I think this calculation is that it pushes it out to May of 2023. And if that's the case, Alvin Bragg, the DA, said one way or another, if the guy's indicted, the indictment will speak for itself. And if he's not indicted, he promised he would explain why. So it's very clear that is being investigated right now. One other thing I want to also talk about why this is a slightly trickier case to bring than just your average case, which is Michael Cohen is a double-edged sword for a prosecutor. He's an extraordinary insider. And he is an absolute fantastic witness. He's will explain everything that happened in detail. The issue, however, is, and I think Cy Vance had this issue, and I think Alvin Bragg will have this issue, is a prosecutor has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And Michael Cohen is going to have to be corroborated. Everything he says is pretty much going to have to be corroborated. And that's because, not just because he has criminal convictions for some of the conduct that he engaged in with Donald Trump, but a little more tricky for a prosecutor is that he has also a criminal conviction in addition to the tax fraud, bank fraud, and campaign finance fraud. He pled guilty to lying under oath to the Senate. And
about Stormy Daniels,
that's tricky.
Right?
Well, I think it was about building a Trump Tower in Moscow. But either way, he has admitted to lying under oath. And as a defense attorney, you know, Popok, we would have a field day with him about you're under oath now, et cetera. So, you know, he also has, you know, a lot of strong feelings about Trump. And, you know,
and he went,
the name of his book.
And he went, before you get to the name of the book, he went to jail and got out because he argued successfully to a judge that he was retaliated against by the Trump administration. Yeah. In terms of his incarceration and otherwise. Look, we all like Michael as a podcaster and a person, and he certainly has paid his debt to society, and we all believe he's telling the truth. But I think what we're outlining here is that he comes with a little bit of baggage. And if you don't have, and maybe we'll turn next to Alan Weisselberg, if you don't have a second corroborating witness, the defense can try to inject, and may be successful to inject, reasonable doubt into a jury's mind through Michael. Yeah,
look, I hope if Michael is listening to this, he doesn't take offense to what I'm saying, because I think Michael's, you know, I think he's extraordinary. I think what he's doing to give back to society for what he's done and continues to give back, I think deserves a lot of respect. And frankly, prosecutors deal with and have witnesses who have criminal convictions all the time. So I don't think that's the issue. I think it's his. Look, he has a bias against Trump. You know, I think isn't his book called Revenge? You know, I mean, he very much. There's just a lot that can be done. And again, the conviction for lying under oath, I think, is of a different nature than just committing crimes. And so I think they're going to have to corroborate that. And hopefully, we'll see soon whether or not a case can be brought here. Look, the other thing that should be noted is Michael Cohen pled guilty to federal campaign laws stemming from his role in this very payment. But the feds passed on charging Trump for it. And so it's a little tricky then to have, you know, for a state prosecutor to say, look, the feds, this is a federal election. And so it's clearly, if anything, a violation of federal election laws, not necessarily state election laws. And the state doesn't have jurisdiction to prosecute things under federal election laws, only state. And if the feds passed on it, it makes it a little harder for a state prosecutor to do it without more. So we'll see.
Let me jump in on that one, and not to get too esoteric, and then we're going to move on to our related Manhattan DA issue with Mark Pomerantz. But if the issue is, in order to get the second crime on the books, to amp it to a felony, if your goal is to have a felony prosecution of Donald Trump, you need the second crime. And if the question is, can the second crime be a federal election campaign violation as opposed to a New York state law? And the problem is him running for federal office and making that payment. Everybody's been sort of hard pressed to find that the New York state crime that is the second crime necessary to elevate this to a felony. If you're using the federal one, you go right back to the problem that you just identified, Karen, which is the federal prosecutors didn't prosecute that crime. And so you have a judge sitting in state court listening to these motions to dismiss arguments with what is, you know, the whole day will be spent and briefing will be spent on, is there a second crime here? Is it appropriate? Is it the second crime that is required under New York law, or is it not? And just to clarify, or to do an editorial correction, you were right. I was wrong. It's 2016. I just saw it on my notes. So that was when the payment was the hush money. It's so long ago. It's hard to believe this is still kicking around. But all right. So look, this is a good follow up to your interview with DA Bragg And look, in the future, we may have the other side of the story, and that other side of the story includes people like Karen Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, who, when Mark's not writing a book, is founding a new law firm devoted to, public interest and all of that. But, listen, it's not surprising, everybody that's a lawyer that was somehow majorly involved with Donald Trump wants to write a book. And so, he's got the right to do that as long as he doesn't violate, Manhattan DA policies, ethics laws and the like, and we'll get into that in a moment. So, Mark, I'll frame it and turn it over to you. Mark Pomerantz, who, to remind everybody, was one of the special prosecutors, picked and appointed, taken out of private practice, brought in by Cy Vance, solely to look at basically all things Donald Trump, along with another private lawyer, Karen Dunn. And so, they didn't really give Alvin Bragg much time to settle into his seat. Alvin took oath of office Jan 1 of last year. By February, Karen Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, with a very huffy, noisy departure, said, "You're not going to prosecute this case after we recommended it? We're out." And that was it. And, the reporting at the time was Alvin didn't say no. He just said, "I need more time. I want more evidence developed. This is now my, buck stops with me as the prosecutor on this, not you, even though you were specially appointed for this." And it's like we're 30 days in. Like, what's basically the rush? I'm paraphrasing. That's my artist rendering of Alvin Bragg. So, but it did happen in February. We know the timing because you and I covered it at the time. When they left with a letter that was written. And now that letter is turned into a 304-page manuscript submitted to Simon & Schuster with the title, The People versus Donald Trump, with Mark Pomerantz. This is what the editor is telling the public. Mark Pomerantz will disclose why he thinks Donald Trump should be prosecuted. And now the assumption, I think rightly so by the Manhattan DA's office, is, your information is sort of stale. You left a year ago. We have an ongoing, this reinforces the point you made, Karen, at the top of the show. Why people are saying there isn't, or they don't think there's an ongoing investigation led by Alvin Bragg and his team against Donald Trump. There is, because they wouldn't send a letter, the cease and desist letter that they've sent this week, yesterday, to Simon & Schuster saying you cannot publish that memoir unless we take a look at it. He's violated internal policies. He did not get the permission of the Manhattan DA to publish it. His information is stale, and he's commenting about an existing criminal investigation that may be compromised by the revelation of whatever is in your book. We don't even know what's in your book because he never got around to sending it to us. So stop. Now, they haven't taken the added step yet of filing a motion in New York State or federal court asking for some sort of what's called prior restraint order, which is hard to do. We'll talk about that at the end, to stop the publication. But they did put them on notice and put Pomerantz on notice. Of course, Pomerantz came back with, "I do everything ethically correct, and there's nothing wrong with the book I'm about to publish." And there's two organizations, Karen, that came out that were interesting, that when you're giving your overview of this and your own opinion of it, I'd like you to comment on, which is the two other entities that were CC'd on the letter by the Manhattan DA's general counsel, who I assume you know, but you'll tell us that. One is the Conflicts of Interest Bureau, and the other one is the Department of Investigation, the DOI, which are also CC'd on the letter to Simon & Schuster. So that's a long-winded framing of the issue. Let's talk about it. You've been there in the office for over 20 years. I'm sure this is not the first book that was written, or maybe you're going to tell us it was the first. It's the first book ever written by a former prosecutor while a prosecution's still going on. What do you think? Is Mark Pomerantz right to have published this book or about to publish this book?
So this is a tricky one for me. So let's just talk about Alvin Bragg for a minute. As you know, we had him on the show last week, and I loved the commentary that we got having him on the show, because it was some of the liveliest commentary that I've ever had on anything that I've done on LegalAF. Maybe you guys you and Ben have had much more lively commentary, and there were people who had strong opinions about it. Some people loved the investigation, and other people thought that I didn't ask tough questions of Alvin Bragg, and that I didn't ask him about exactly this, Karen Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, and about the case, et cetera. But what people need to know is that I would never have gotten Alvin Bragg to come on the podcast if I asked any of those questions. He just wouldn't have come on. because you don't talk about a pending investigation. And if I actually agreed ahead of time that I wouldn't ask those questions. And, I thought there was enough to talk about without that. So let's now talk about this book and what's happening here. Kerry Dunn is someone who I worked with for a long time. He's a really, really smart, thoughtful, by the book lawyer. And he's kind of a lawyer's lawyer, if you will. And he wasn't brought on specially to do Trump. He worked in the office for a while under Cy Vance, and he was just a really excellent general counsel. The role that Leslie Dubeck, the woman who signed the letter you just talked about, now has for Alvin Bragg. And Kerry Dunn, as the general counsel, was like the lawyer to the DA, and he advised the office on all things. And so, for example, I wasn't surprised that Kerry Dunn, although he resigned, didn't leak his resignation letter, because Kerry Dunn is a very by the book kind of guy. And I'm also not surprised that Kerry Dunn isn't on the Mark Pomerantz book, because again, it's just not in keeping with who Kerry Dunn, at least the Kerry Dunn I know, is. Although they are law partners, they just started a not-for-profit, Kerry Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, to handpick and handle cases that are not kind of statement civil rightsy kind of cases about, election interference, abortion rights, that kind of stuff. And I give them a lot of credit for what they're trying to do. The Mark Pomerantz, I don't know. I never really worked with him, so I don't know him as well. And he came on to the office as I was leaving. We might have overlapped for a very brief period of time, but we certainly didn't work together. And, he was brought on as a special prosecutor to bring this, or to investigate and potentially bring this case. And he worked with Kerry, who was already on the case. And to bring him on as a special prosecutor, he had to sign a written agreement. And he signed this written agreement with the office to be under an obligation, basically to bind himself to that he would have to get prior written permission from the DA's office before making any disclosures relating to the existence, nature, or content of any communications or records or documents that related to this investigation. And that language was put in this letter that Leslie Dubeck wrote to Simon & Schuster and Mark Pomerantz. And the reason that was put in is because talking publicly about an ongoing pending investigation actually hurts the case. And you need to be able to do these things in a way that witnesses can't tailor their testimony, that they're not going to hide evidence, that they're, I'm not a prosecutor anymore. Prosecutors have to be able to do this. And so that language was deliberately put in there. And frankly, it's just not done. Prosecutors, when you are a prosecutor, in a million years, you wouldn't talk about a pending investigation that could hurt the pending investigation. So I was just frankly kind of shocked about this book.
Has it ever happened in the 20 years that you were the number two in the office where a prosecutor, special or otherwise, wrote a memoir about an existing criminal prosecution?
Not that I know of, not certainly that I can think of. And I don't want to say no for sure, because somebody is going to say, don't you remember when X, Y, and Z happened? But not that I know of, because it's just not done. And, frankly, when Kerry and Mark, and I give Mark Pomerantz a lot of deference because he's with Kerry and I have so much respect for Kerry. So I've always sort of grouped them together. But I have to say, whereas I viewed them as a little bit, I don't want to say heroes, but when they kind of resigned in protest and they thought even if the case was a little bit hard to do, it was worthy of doing, and they resigned in protest. And there was a little part of me that kind of felt like they were a little bit like they were heroes. But when you write a book and you benefit from it and you can hurt the investigation, I don't know. I no longer, I have to say, I just see it slightly differently at this point, given what Alvin Bragg has specifically said. I don't know why no one's believing him. Look, I've never worked for Alvin Bragg. Yeah. No, I don't know the
You're
guy
not here to
other
defend
than,
Alvin, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've never worked for him. I have no loyalty to him.
Yeah. But let me ask you a question that people are going to
over and over again.
Yeah.
No, he said over and over again, there is an active investigation. And I don't know why people aren't believing him. But hopefully with Michael Cohen going in, they see that.
Yeah. I'm less worried about what people believe about Alvin Bragg. But I do have a question about something you've said a couple of times now about Mark Pomerantz and others that would write a book like this. You said it could hurt the prosecution. So explain briefly to our listeners and followers how a book written when you don't know what's in it by a prosecutor who was on a team but left a year ago, while the criminal prosecution continues to develop under the leadership of new prosecutors and all, how could that hurt the prosecution, right? Make the argument for how that could hurt a prosecution.
So because I don't know the facts of that case, I'm going to talk about a hypothetical case, okay? And one that I think would be easy for people to understand. So if you had, let's say, a high-profile murder case, and it's all over the news, but you don't have anyone under arrest. What the police do is they deliberately hold back evidence and information because lots of people come forward and they say, I saw this, or I didn't see this, or confess to the crime. Some people that will say that, or that they know someone who confessed to the crime. And the police and prosecutors will use this information that they've held back to hear what people are saying about the case. Because if they are saying, no, I saw this, and I saw the guy was wearing red shoes, but no one's ever said that before, that person has information that can be corroborated by evidence that you have that hasn't been spoken about publicly. Another thing is there are witnesses who might be sympathetic to a defendant, right? His family, his friends, etc. If they know what all the evidence is ahead of time, they can tailor their testimony so that somehow it supports what the defense or the prosecution, frankly. So you really want to not leak information. The other thing that can happen is people can destroy evidence, right? If they know that something is really important to a case, they could erase the videotape or throw out the documents or delete the emails, whatever it is. There are ways to do that. And so it's important not to do those things. But also, the thing is, there are witnesses too who are very reticent to come forward. Let's talk about Donald Trump. I mean, look what has happened to anybody who has come forward and testified or said anything or come into his orbit at all. He unleashes a tirade and a fury against them. People's lives are ruined. Those poor poll workers. That nice woman Ruby Freeman. And her mother, who literally lives are destroyed because he's so vindictive when he hears that anyone has done anything. So the minute anyone talks about, oh, well, this person saw this or this person did that, if you had a witness that was maybe agreeing to go into the grand jury but doesn't want their life destroyed, the minute that all comes out, especially in a case like this, you've lost those witnesses. Those people are not going to cooperate, and they're not necessarily going to come forward. So there are many ways.
Yeah, I'll give you one more
investigation. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll give you one more. Why would you want? We don't know what's in Mark Pomerantz's book. That's the problem. But if Mark Pomerantz is giving a roadmap or any kind of blueprint for what the prosecution is looking at, what they thought about and discarded, what they're pursuing, even if it's a year old, it'll help the defense in advance. And why showcase and why give out any information or intel? That's why you keep everything under wraps. That's why we don't know much about what's going on with Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice and Jack Smith, other than when he issues subpoenas where people come in for interviews and the reporters are sitting around taking notes. There's a reason for that. And one of them is you don't want to tip off the defense either. So listen, we're going to have to see. Maybe one day we get to talk to Mark Pomerantz. He's going to be, I guess, very highly sought after. Do you think the Manhattan? We'll leave it on this before we move on to our sponsor and to the next topic. Do you think that the Manhattan DA office, your old office, goes all the way and brings a injunction in court to stop its publication? But let me frame it this way before you answer it. There is a constitutional body of law called the No Prior Restraint Doctrine, which says that in a democracy, and the founding fathers were very strong on this, the press, no matter really how they get the information, even if it's leaked to them, has the right to publish it and to let the public see it to keep people accountable. And it starts with, there's a 1931 case that actually kind of set it out, Neer versus Minnesota. But then the case that everybody sort of remembers, because it's also been portrayed in a couple of movies, is the Pentagon Papers, with Daniel Ellsberg revealing confidential information that he obtained from a source about how the war in Vietnam and Cambodia was going. Not well. And different than the way that the generals and the president was saying the war was going. And he leaked that to the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they were about to run it and publish it. And there was the government ran in to try to stop it. And that's where the U.S. Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision basically said our bedrock principle of First Amendment constitutional rights is that if a publisher, whether it's Simon & Schuster or the New York Times or WashPo, has the right to publish this once it got into their hands. And even I've seen cases along these lines, using the Pentagon Papers as the foundation, even in the area where it could compromise an intelligence investigation, a criminal investigation. Once it sort of gets into the hands of the publisher, it sort of has to be, they have to be allowed to publish. So my question to you is, knowing that doctrine, do you think that the Manhattan DA office goes in and tries to stop Simon & Schuster from publishing?
So my understanding is the letter isn't a cease and desist because of what you just said, because of prior restraint. And so my understanding is what the letter does is it basically asks them to ask Simon & Schuster and Mark Pomerantz to give the DA's office a copy of the book, of the manuscript. And the DA's office specifically has said, this is not a cease and desist. This is what we're trying to do is protect the integrity of the investigation. And so I think what they want is to review the manuscript. They've promised to do it in 60 days. So they're not going to hold up this publication for long, and let them know if there's anything that could hurt the investigation. Now, 60 days from now, also takes you closer to the statute of limitations. So maybe they can bring the case before that, and it won't. And then the publication of this doesn't hurt it. We also don't know if the Stormy Daniels case is now bigger, if the case that the Manhattan DA's office is doing is the hush money payments plus, right? We don't know what's happened in the last year. And so it could be more than, it could be the stuff that Mark Pomerantz was looking at. And, the other thing is there are two separate people in different positions, right? There's Simon & Schuster and whoever their parent organization is, who I think you're right. Once they have it, they publish it. I don't see why they wouldn't give the Manhattan DA's office an advance copy. I don't see how they are hurt by that and allow them to review it. But I think there's also Mark Pomerantz and what is his liability, right? He's the one who went and wrote the book. And so I think he potentially is going to have a little bit of a problem if this gets published, right? You mentioned in the beginning that the Conflict of Interest Board, which is also, we call COIB, you mentioned that that's an issue, that they CC'd them, and that the Department of Investigation, DOI, was also CC'd. And that's because I think Pomerantz has a few areas that if I were him, I'd be slightly worried about. It's a good thing he has a law firm now to handle pro bono things, because I think they're going to say, this is their first cause that they're taking on, right? The putting sunlight on the Donald Trump case, and I think it's a noble cause. It is wanting to do that, especially if you don't think that Alvin Bragg is going to bring a case. But I really do think that Alvin has said over and over and over again, that he's bringing this case, and I think Pomerantz has to worry about a couple different things. I think he has to worry about the fact that he didn't get approval from the Manhattan DA's office ahead of time, but I guess if they do give them a copy to review and the 60 days to review it, then I guess that would be getting permission, right? So I think that's one, but I think he has I think there's a few other areas that, that he has to worry about. Number one, most of the information that he got, don't forget, was got by a grand jury subpoena. And, that's protected. That's in the criminal procedure law, Article 190. And, disclosure of that is a felony under the penal law, Section 215.70. And so, if he discloses secret grand jury information, that's a problem. He's also facing issues, under the professional conduct rules for attorneys. That's where he has to worry about the Conflict of Interest Board. And, there's a rule 1.6 and 3.6, that talks about the professional conduct rules, for attorneys. And him disclosing information about an ongoing investigation really, I think, is going to put him in a a tricky place. There's also, and I think there's a New York City charter provision, 2604 D5, that he is, that it's tricky, and I think that's why the Department of Investigation, the DOI, was CC'd, because they want them to look at these various provisions of him disclosing, Pomerantz disclosing information that could potentially hurt an ongoing. So there's two separate issues, right? There's secret grand jury information, and that's one set of crimes. But then he's just, as a former prosecutor who, think about the role of a prosecutor, right? You're given such enormous power. And so with that power, you have a great responsibility. And there are rules governing what you can and cannot do with that information. And he has to, but he has to be very careful so that he doesn't get in trouble, because if he ruins or somehow interferes with an ongoing and active investigation, that's a problem. And I think what Alvin Bragg said is, you don't know whether what you said in the book, even if it's not secret grand jury material, you don't know whether your information that you are saying in your book, whether that's going to hurt this investigation, because you don't know what our investigation is into, because you've been gone a year.
You've been gone for a year.
So it's right. So it's stale. So,
but the good news. And so, listen, I don't want to excoriate. Listen, Mark Pomerantz has his own cross to bear now. I think the issue that you've outlined perfectly is that even if prior restraint is okay, that it okays the publisher to publish it, it doesn't mean that Mark Pomerantz is out of the woods at all in terms of these potential violations. But putting that aside for a minute, and as we leave this segment, the good news is that Alvin Bragg's office is defending an ongoing criminal investigation related to Donald Trump, because if the naysayers were right that he's not doing anything, that he should have picked up the mantle from Dunn and Pomerantz a year ago, 1 month into the office, and taken them at their word on their evidence that they should have prosecuted, or else, if there wasn't any criminal investigation to protect, I don't think she sends the letter, the general counsel for the DA sends the letter to the Simon & Schuster, do they? Right. So no. The good news is it's an indicator that there is a criminal prosecution.
Yeah. No, there's 100%. There's an active investigation, and it's different than the Stormy Daniels one. So there is more than one active, and these are different lawyers on the case, right?
That's right.
One other thing I want to say about this is, and I had second thoughts as I was saying all these things. I have second thoughts, because I really, when I tell you that Kerry Dunn is an extraordinarily smart lawyer, I can't underscore that enough. And he wouldn't associate himself with someone who wasn't equally excellent. And so part of me wonders if this is by design, if Pomerantz is, he's too smart in some ways. He's too smart to do the things that I said just now, he might be doing. He's just too smart. And so I think he's thought of all these things. I think he's somehow figured out a way to walk this, thread the needle, if you will. And I wonder if he's doing this to push Bragg and to push Bragg to do the case a little bit, Yeah. And so we'll see, because I just can't, honestly, knowing the two of them, or I should say knowing Kerry and then him by association, I just can't believe that they would do anything other than the right thing, the smart thing. That's just not who they are. At least the ones the they that I know, that's just not who they are. So
whether Mark or others are in hot water or not, it'll be left for another day, and we'll figure it out. I think you definitely have a honest and authentic opinion, knowing at least half of that duo about where they're at, and we'll continue to follow the story. And speaking of hot water, Karen, we're into our new sponsor time, and this is where I get to take off my glasses. And we're talking about Green Chef. And the second time they've been a sponsor for our show. Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well with dinners that work for you, not the other way around. Green Chef's pre-made and pre-measured sauces and dressings and spices makes keeping a healthy lifestyle even easier. Put the time you save on meal prep towards achieving your 2023 goals. Green Chef has options for every lifestyle: keto, paleo, vegan, vegetarian, fast and fit, Mediterranean, and gluten-free, as just a few examples. And Green Chef's recipes feature organic produce, premium proteins, and sustainably sourced ingredients. Raise your food standards in 2023 and reap the flavor benefits. It's the only meal kit that is both carbon and plastic offset. Green Chef offsets 100% of their carbon footprint, as well as 100% of the plastic in every box. That's why we love them on the show, because we're very pro-environment. We like to keep our environment and keep it healthy. I personally enjoyed learning about and using Green Chef's meal kits. It took the thinking out of healthy and tasty meal making on days when my family is pressed for time, running 100 miles an hour in opposite directions. And we tried things like we were able to try the Mediterranean set with menus changing every week and discounts that come out to about $5.40 a meal. We've tried roasted chicken with lemon crema. We've tried the pecan crusted sustainable sockeye salmon. And just as a personal story, I have a neighbor who's 94 years old, who unfortunately took a spill at home and had to spend some time in a rehabilitation center. She came home, and one of the first things I introduced her to was this sponsor, was Green Chef and the meal kits, which she's enjoyed. And we're going to set her up with meal kits, so she has them while she's a little bit laid up in the house. And it's just another thing to think about, not just you, but others in your life or around your life that could benefit from having these really high quality meal kits delivered to their home. It reduces waste when you use them. It's environmentally friendly. And here at LegalAF, Karen and I have negotiated a terrific discount for first-time customers of 60% off. To get it, you go to greenchef.com/legalaf60. That's GREENCHEF.com/legalaf60 and get, which is 60, and get 60% off plus free shipping. Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well, and we are so pleased to have them as a sponsor. Right, Karen?
I had never used a meal kit before, and I have to say I'm a huge fan. It made things so much easier just to have all the ingredients already pre-measured, pre-made, all there. And as you said, the no waste was fantastic. That you did not, you had just the right amount. And the onions that I had to cut the ends off of, or the lime after I squeezed it, I threw it in my lomi. And so I had no waste from my Green Chef, and I loved it.
I love combining our sponsors, right?
I've become, you have no idea what these sponsors have turned me into. I have become, I am so into all of this. I love it.
People should understand that we try the products. We like the products. If we don't like the products, we don't allow them to sponsor on the show. So that's coming from the anchors direct.
Yeah. And I do research.
Yeah, 1,000%. So let's move on to our next segment. Now that we've covered the entire waterfront related to the Manhattan DA's office, let's talk about that other candidate for high office, potentially in the Republican Party, Governor Ron DeSantis. And I guess he thought when he was doing the political stunts, using human lives as his props, when he used Florida funds several months ago to divert Texas attempted immigrants, in other words, people who wanted to apply for immigration status. They're often referred to in the press as migrants. I don't really like that. I like to say people that would yearn to breathe free. They'd like to be Americans. They'd like to have legal status in this country. And they come,
at least migrants better than illegal alien, which is what the DeSantises of the world call them.
Yeah, we're not using that term here, but those human beings who, by the way, didn't want to go to Florida and certainly didn't want to go to the places that they were dumped off, whether it's Kamala Harris's house or Joe Biden's, the White House, or state houses in Massachusetts. They don't want to go to these places. They want to be embraced by a loving, forgiving, dignified immigration process and country, and welcomed. Instead, this is all not disputed. This can't be disputed. We'll talk about the legal issues in a minute, but the facts are not disputed. He used $12 million, Governor DeSantis, in the Florida budget because he's got the Florida legislature by their short hairs over his knee. They will do anything that he says because they genuflect to the idol of Governor DeSantis. And he said, I want $12 million reappropriated from COVID funds so I can use to do a political stunt. I mean, he didn't quite say it that way, but he might as well have, to take $12 million to take flights and charter planes and take people, not even in Florida, this is a problem ultimately, from Texas, and divert them to places where I can use human beings as human props for my political purposes in a very inhumane and despicable fashion. And the Florida legislature thought through that for a second and said, where do we sign? And they did it. But, lawsuits and the firewall of our legal system, I hope people have learned on LegalAF, is one place we hopefully find justice and our democracy is saved and protected and preserved. So a state senator named Jason Pizzo from North Miami Beach, who sits in the legislature of the Florida, brought a suit in his own name, as any citizen in Florida can do, challenging the quote-unquote law or guidelines or whatever they were, the appropriation of the money by the governor, because the governor is not, just like the president is not, he's not a king. He's not a Leviathan. He can't do whatever he wants whenever he wants it without oversight. And if your legislature isn't going to give you a checks and balance, which this one is not, because they just have complete fealty to Ron DeSantis, then you got to go into court and hope that the circuit court and then the Supreme Court for the state is going to do the right thing. So the actual legal challenge here, and then I'll turn it over to you, Karen, is that the appropriation, the use of the money, according to the lawsuit filed in Tallahassee and Leon County, Florida, was not appropriate because that amount of money is so substantial that it's basically a new policy. And that new policy has to be in a separate bill to be considered by the House so the public can weigh in and it be freely debated on the floor of the Florida legislature, not buried like in Congress, the U.S. Congress, buried in some other bill. By Florida Constitution, and I was a lawyer, as people know, in Florida for 20 years and actually practiced in this area of the law because my old firm represented a lot of local governments, and they often had problems with the state and battled with the state, as this state senator is doing. So you have to have, by Florida Constitution, a separate and independent stated law or bill or proposed law so that people aren't hoodwinked. They don't wake up the next morning and go, wait a minute, they were doing something with driver's licenses, and that made, people that wanted to immigrate to this country end up in Massachusetts. How did that happen? It shouldn't happen. And that is the challenge, that it's violated the Florida Constitution by the way it was framed or the way it wasn't appropriately in a separate law. It violated, according to the lawsuit, federal constitutional law, the preeminent position of the federal government over issues of international immigration into this country. That's supposed to be a federal issue for the executive branch and others, not a state issue. And that's in the lawsuit. And DeSantis didn't like the suit and moved to dismiss it. And we have a ruling by the Leon County Circuit Court judge, which frankly, Leon County kind of trends being moderate to a little bit Democrat. It's always been a little bit of a thorn in the side of all governors of Florida, including DeSantis. So what happened with this decision, and what happens next from the suit, Karen?
So yeah, the judge refused to dismiss the case against DeSantis. He did dismiss it against the chief financial officer. I think his name was Petronas, or Jimmy Petronas, as a defendant, because he's like, I just wrote the check. I had nothing to do with this. I have a question for you, though. Why did DeSantis need to do the Why did he have to get people from tech? Why did he have to, other than the fact that he's clearly a co-conspirator with the other terrible governor, Abbott, why did he have to get people from Texas? And then he stopped in the panhandle of Florida so that they landed in Florida, because I guess he must have known that they had to somehow set foot on Florida in order to be able to use this money. I just didn't understand why he had to go to Texas to pick people up. I mean, it's so terrible, as you said, what they did. Using people as stunts is terrible, and as props, and it's just so dehumanizing. But why did he have to go to Texas to get?
I'll give you my view for 20 years there in the geopolitics of the area, because the people that come to Florida to find freedom are coming from countries that are also important to DeSantis for his voting bloc. So they want, because the only Texas has got Mexico, which makes for great television optics when you're turning away poor Mexicans from the border. And there's a lot of them. Millions of Mexicans try to get into this country in order to have freedom in America. So, you have a volume issue, right? You got more immigrants coming in, attempting to come in through the Texas border. That's one. The ones in Florida, pardon me, the ones in Florida are from Haiti, from Cuba, and from other countries in South and Central America, who have strong voting blocs of American citizens of that ethnicity, of that culture, in especially a place like South Florida. So if you're going to turn away, if he took Venezuelans, Cubans, Brazilians, and Haitians and did that, he would lose South Florida in a voting bloc. So it was another calculated, despicable decision. I can't use my own people that want to come to Florida because that'll piss off people that would vote for me. So let me take somebody that nobody cares about, which are people coming through Texas and Mexico, and I'll ship them with my money. It's not even his money. It's the taxpayers' money of the state of Florida. And that is the problem. It wasn't even his immigration problem. It's terrible when Abbott does it in Texas. But Abbott is now exporting his immigration problem to other states and giving them up for grabs. It's just like slavery, giving them up to grabs to any governor that wants them to use them as political props. These are human beings.
It's disgusting.
Some of them were dumped off in the winter in T-shirts with no coats in front of Kamala Harris's house in the middle of the night. Not the exact group that the suit is over with DeSantis, but it might as well be. This, I mean, I can't. I just get so beside myself with it. And for people that say I'm a Republican, and that's okay. I like a two-party system in this country. In order to say that, you take it all. Just like we have to take it all as Democrats and the progressive side of the party and the left wing of the party. You got to take it all. You got to take abortion decisions against women's rights. You got to take the anti-women position. You got to take the anti-ethnic and immigration position because that's your party. And so that's the long-winded answer to your question. Because he wouldn't
says you're
dare.
A Republican, Popok?
He wouldn't dare do it to the voting bloc connected people that came to his own state.
That's fascinating.
Because
Nobody would say you're a
he's
Republican.
also a coward. He's also a coward. That's the other reason. Okay. So anything else you think on the DeSantis, or can we move on to our next sponsor, another sponsor?
So just the judge put it over for a January 30th trial date, which seemed really fast to me.
Yeah, this is going to this was like a case that didn't get much publicity. I know Ben, our co-anchor, did a nice hot take on it, and it got a lot of, and I did one earlier. But no, this is going to trial. Like DeSantis is on trial. His stupid policy is probably going to lose, and people might be saying, well, he'll just appeal. He's not going to be able to appeal to the feds. He's got to have to stay within the state system. And frankly, there's nothing to appeal right now because the way Florida's very unique appellate system is, unlike states like New York, where you can appeal everything, a discovery order, I don't want to sit for a deposition, I don't like the tie my judge is wearing today. You can run into the appellate court, as you know. In Florida, you got to wait till like the end of the case. Like since this was not a final order and not like dispositive, they gotta try this case. There's no place to go. Now, at the end, if they lose, they can go to the Florida Supreme Court, which is dominated by Republican appointed people. But right now, strap it on. They're going to trial in an unfriendly place in a college town up in Tallahassee, who I'm not sure what the jury pool is going to look like, but I don't think they're going to like this stunt. And the fact that public money was used to feather and to promote the career advancement of one Ron DeSantis for presidential office.
Yeah, I hope you're right.
I don't know how he sleeps at night, but I know how you sleep at night.
Excellent segue, Popok. Excellent.
Thank you.
So this is a sponsor that I love very much. It's Miracle Made sheets, and it's basically a pair of sheets that are both self-cleaning and self-temperature regulating, and they're excellent quality. So if you're someone who wakes up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend these Miracle Made bed sheets because they are inspired by silver-infused fabrics made by NASA, and they are temperature regulating bedding, so you can sleep better all night and not wake up hot or cold or uncomfortable, because we all know a good night's sleep is one of the most important things you can get to be refreshed the next day. You know, they're self-cooling, and so you have better quality sleep. And, you know, I have to say, they actually work. And whatever this silver infused, technology that they use that was developed by NASA, it's thermoregulating, and it's designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night. And it really, you wake up because you feel good. And so it really, really works. They also are self-cleaning, and something about this natural silver prevents I think almost 100% or 99.9% of bacterial growth. And so they stay cleaner 3 times longer than other sheets. So, it's a good thing. So you don't have to wash them as often, and they'll stay cleaner, and you don't have any terrible odors that sometimes happen on bed sheets. And they're very comfortable. They're excellent quality. They're very luxurious, and they are not as expensive as some of the other luxury brands, but they still are. They cost money, and so as a result, we were able, as you said, to negotiate something for the listeners to try this, so that it makes them a little more attainable. And go to trymiracle.com/legalaf. So try miracle.com/legalaf to try them. And you'll save over 40% off. And if you use the promo code LegalAF at checkout, so that's in addition to this this URL, the trymiracle.com/legalaf. If you put the LegalAF promo code in at checkout, you'll also get 3 free towels. So, and Miracle is so confident in this product that it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you're not 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. So upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made, and go to trymiracle.com/legalaf and use the promo code LegalAF to claim your 40% off and your 3-piece towel set, and treat yourself.
That was a great new sponsor. We love to have them on board, and thanks for doing that for us and giving us that rundown, Karen. And let's end with our midweek with just a brief overview of what's going on in another Washington, D.C. courthouse or courtroom in front of Judge Kelly this time, with seditious conspirators, or at least those that are accused, the Proud Boys. We've spoken at length in the past about the Oath Keepers. 1/2 of the Oath Keepers have already been tried and convicted of seditious conspiracy, including Kelly Meggs and Stuart Rhodes, the leaders of the Oath Keepers. But, in this boy band competition, there's another competitor for craziest, unpatriotic group of people and seditionists, and that is the Proud Boys. And they are led, or had been led until they were arrested and jailed, by Enrique Tarrio out of Miami. We're back to Florida again, and a group of other people, and all the leaders of the Proud Boys and their connections, direct connections. This is undisputed. Whether the jury convicts them or not, we'll leave that for another day based on the weight of the evidence presented by the prosecutors. But it is undisputed that Enrique Tarrio is very close, and has always been very close publicly, with Roger Stone, who is very close publicly with Donald Trump. So by the transitive property, Enrique Tarrio is very close with Donald Trump, right? Roger Stone has always been considered the right hand of Donald Trump, right? The fixer. And this is his fixer. And so you have that connection. And they've already infiltrated not just the Trump organization and helping them cling to power by storming the Capitol along with the Oath Keepers, but they've also infiltrated politics at a retail level. The Miami-Dade GOP, the Republican Party in Miami-Dade, has a couple of Proud Boys that made their way onto the executive board of the, having lived there, I can't even say it out loud. Proud Boys have served and tried to run for and almost got on the executive board of the Miami-Dade GOP executive board. And they've been very involved with like Latinas for Trump, all these things that look like grassroots organizations, but they're nothing of the kind. And they're all fronts for a violent group who flipped over and got activated by Donald Trump when he said, you might remember them, two things. He tweeted, "Come on Jan 6th to the electoral count. It's going to be wild." And they heard that as not even a dog whistle. They woke up and activated their sleeper cell of crazy un-American terrorists against America. And the second is, you remember in the debate, they asked Donald Trump point blank, how do you feel about the Proud Boys, a group of white supremacists, racist, fascists, violent people who marched in West Virginia and all of that, in Charlottesville, actually, I'm sorry, in Charlottesville, Virginia. How do you feel about them supporting you? And he said, I don't really know that organization, but I've heard good things. And I just say to them, stand back and stand by. Well, they did the opposite of standing back and standing by. They moved forward and immediately attacked the Capitol, and they're on trial for this. The opening statements have already happened. They're blaming Donald Trump for their defense, and they're taking a page out of the Stuart Rhodes book, which only got Stuart Rhodes convicted. So talk to us briefly, Karen, from a prosecutor standpoint. How do you think the opening went from the defense that they're laying out to the jury? Because, as trial lawyers, we can tell our listeners and followers that, you write a check to the jury in your opening. And if you don't cash that check during the course of a case by bringing the goods, by bringing in the witnesses you promised you would bring in, by supporting the defenses or the case that you have with evidence, with witnesses, the jury's going to punish you at the end. We call it, you didn't cash your check. The jury listens to everything you say in open. They write it down, and which they should. And if at the end they'll say, "Oh, remember that guy? Remember that Popok guy? And he said all those things. He's going to bring all those witnesses in. He didn't do any of that." And so you have a credibility problem as an advocate. They made a lot of promises in that opening. And what did you think about him as it relates to the defense? And what did you think about the prosecution and their opening, and where that's going to go in terms of the ultimate outcome?
This case is slightly different than the Oath Keepers trial because, if you recall, the Oath Keepers stashed weapons in Virginia in case they needed them, and in a hotel. And the Proud Boys aren't accused of being armed, like the Oath Keepers were, but they are accused of engaging in violence and inciting others to violence. Others, and a term that they use, which really bothers me and gets under my skin, but normies. I don't like that term, like normal people, normies. It's just very strange. But those who didn't have ties to them, so it's a very different type of case. And the prosecution, interestingly, the clip you talked about for the 2020 election, the debate with Joe Biden, when Chris Wallace asked Trump, about not condemning white supremacists, and Trump said the famous now quote that you said, Proud Boys stand back and stand by. Somebody has to do something about the Antifa left, and the left. The prosecution actually played that clip in their opening, which I thought was a really excellent strategy. And basically, the prosecution is saying, that they listened to Trump and they stood by. And then on January 6th, when Trump basically gave everybody the green, knowing that people were there armed and dangerous, and gave them the green light, and then pointed them, to the Capitol, it's like, that's all part of their theory. And so I think that's how they're using that is, okay, yeah, they didn't have weapons. themselves, but they had a weaponized crowd that was at their disposal. The defense in this case is going to be, basically Donald Trump told me to do it, but that hasn't really persuaded any jurors yet. So I'd be surprised if that works here. They're going to say, oh, we can't get a fair trial because everybody, knows about this. And, this is DC, et cetera, et cetera. So they're going to argue that. They're going to say this is guilt by association. We're being tarred with the actions of others who we had no ties to.
You mean on appeal after they lose? They're going to say,
well, no, because don't forget that. Well, yeah, there's that too. But don't forget, they're going to. I think they're going to argue all this stuff at. There's jury nullification, right? You can say to the jury, look, you're just tarring us with the feathers of others' actions that we had no tie to. You're going to look at all the text messages, recordings, social media, because the prosecution did all of that, right? They did an extensive investigation. If I'm a defense attorney, I'm going to throw that in their face and say, go ahead, jury, look at every text message, look at every social media, look at every recording, and you're not going to see a single time a plot to engage in this. This was a spontaneous thing that everybody just did. There was no organized plan to attack the Capitol.
Can I ask you a question?
But they have cooperators. They have cooperators, yeah.
That is the reason. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm really asking it for you, for our listeners. They're making much in their opening and otherwise with the argument that it was all spontaneous. We didn't show up for this. It just flipped over and tipped over and became herd mentality and all of this other stuff. And they had some confidential informants that were embedded with the Proud Boys. Of course, the Proud Boys didn't know. They were cooperating with the FBI, who sort of said something like that. But that's not a defense to most crimes. Like, I showed up. I did all those really bad things, but the crowd made me do it. Like, that's not a defense. Is it a defense here because we're charging them with conspiracy and the seditious conspiracy? Is it the conspiracy that this is addressed to? Nothing was planned. We just all showed up, and in the spur of the moment, we just decided to attack our seat of democracy. Is that because of the conspiracy? Is the prosecution?
Yeah.
Is the prosecution? Yeah.
Yes. It's two things. I mean, first of all, conspiracy requires an agreement between two or more people, right? So they have to have agreed to do this. If it's a spontaneous thing and everybody at the same time says, "Oh, I'm going to do this," myself, it's not conspiracy.
Right.
Right?
900 people. Right. 900 people, each individually making a decision for themselves with no tacit agreement among them, means there's no conspiracy or among these people.
Right. I mean, it might be criminal trespass, right? But
which we
but
don't
it's
want.
not seditious right. I mean, because that's a much lower crime without any, without the same, this has whatever. So it's a big deal, and that's why they're saying that.
Did you notice that we have complementary clothes on today? Our wardrobe is very complimentary. We're wearing a very similar
Is that right?
shades of black and gray. I don't know if we sometimes I just these things just pop into my mind and I feel like sharing it with people. But look, we're going to follow Proud Boys. My gut is that we're going to end up in the same place, that this whole Trump made me do it, and even though I'm a Proud Boy and I'm a racist and I make all these comments and I've marched in Charlottesville and I've attacked Antifa and I'm a violent group, they're not going to buy that they're, as their defense, one of the defense lawyers said, because each one of them, there's 5 of them on trial, each one has a defense lawyer, each one gets to do an opening statement and a closing argument, and one of them said, it's just a drinking club. It's just a drinking club. It's a bunch of guys get together and shoot the shit with beer. No one buys this. Everybody knows what the Proud Boys are. They've become, they may have started out as one thing, but they've ended up, at least under Enrique Tarrio, as something completely different. And they've become the bodyguards of choice with the Oath Keepers. They might even be more violent than the Oath Keepers. I'm not sure you can. It's like 2 motorcycle gangs. Like, which is more violent, like the old Hells Angels or the other ones? I mean, they're all it's sort of the same. And there was a lot of fighting, and we're gonna have to follow this both on jury nullification arguments that will be made at the end of the trial and on appeal. There was a lot, unlike the Judge Mehta trial over the Oath Keepers. There were just crazy, ridiculous arguments with the judge, almost I mean, he was this close to finding some of the defense lawyers in contempt pre-trial, before the jury was selected, about evidence that was going to be allowed to be brought in. I mean, two of the defense lawyers, it's reported, actually said, Judge, if you let that piece of evidence, you let that video in, and the video is like of their guys, their defendants. If you let that in, I'm getting out of the case. And the judge said, okay, stop. You're not trying to threaten the court with that. If I let this piece of evidence in, you're going to try to leave the case. First of all, I'm not even sure I'd let you out of the case. And that's a power a federal judge has, not to let people out of the case. But the fact that they even went there with the federal judge and started arguing and talking over him in a very disrespectful way shows that this is a renegade band of defense lawyers, different than the defense lawyers in front of Judge Meida's courtroom. And this judge has got to get them under control. Now, so far, there hasn't been any reports of it coming out and bubbling up in front of the jury. But we got to keep an eye on it, because this defense team does not like the judge, and I'm getting the sense the judge doesn't like the defense team either.
Well, I was going to ask you a question. So this trial has really gone in fits and starts. You know, normally a criminal trial is very smooth, right? It's not, you open, you put on witnesses, there's no interruptions. I mean, it goes very smoothly and quickly. But this trial, for whatever reason, keeps starting and stopping. And, you know, I was wondering whether it's by design, because some defense attorneys use that disruption as a tactic, right? To try to cause a mistrial, to try to, you know, throw the case in some way. And maybe they don't like the jury. Maybe they don't like certain pieces of evidence. Maybe, you know, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it's
I think you're right on it.
or?
Yeah, I think it's right by design. I think they, you know, it's like artificial intelligence. They learned from what happened in the Oath Keepers trial, just as the prosecution, same office, different prosecutors, just as the prosecutors learned from what happened with and what to do better when they present the next Oath Keepers case. And it certainly filtered over to Proud Boys. I'm sure prosecutors were talking to each other about things that happened. The defense is talking, and they smooth and easy and quick, expeditious presentation of the evidence is not in the defense's best interest. And they saw what happened over there. So the more you can piss off the jury, you just don't want to piss them off so much they take it out on your client. You don't want to piss so much that they're like guilty. But maybe it's creating doubt. It's making it hard for the jury to follow. It allows the defense to catch their breath. You know, it's sort of like if you're a professional tennis fan, it's sort of like, we all know they do it. It's like when one of the top 5 players, or any of them, is having sort of a rough match and they fall behind a little bit, and to sort of change the momentum, they take that 20-minute bathroom break that pisses off everybody, including the opponent, and then they come back and win the match. It's sort of like that. And I definitely think that's a very good point that you're raising. I definitely think that's what's going on. And I think Judge Kelly is not, for whatever reason, it doesn't have them as under control, the defense team, the defense lawyers, as Judge Meida has, different group of people. Anyway, but look, everybody's learning from all of these trials. We've already got reporting out that the newest prosecutors that joined Jack Smith, one of their first stops upon arrival on the team, the 2 people that Jack Smith just hired, including his former right-hand person from his office in public corruption, his first stop was to the courtroom for the Proud Boys to meet with the trial team there and to talk to them and to observe firsthand. So, you know, there's no grass growing under the feet of any prosecutor that's assigned to these cases, and certainly not the ones that are working directly with Jack Smith. But we've reached the end of another midweek edition of LegalAF with Michael Popok and Karen Friedman Agnifilo in sunny someplace, but reporting in dutifully as she does. Sunny someplace. But she's reporting in dutifully as she does every week along with me. You know, there's a couple of ways that you could support this show if you enjoy it. One of them is to do what you're doing now, which is to watch it with us and watch it with us live, and we participate in the live chat and all of that. The other way is to listen to it on audio in the same episode, but in audio. It gives you some time to kind of not be bothered with the chat and really absorb all the information that we're providing. And that is on any of the podcast platforms where you get your podcast from. And you can just pick it, whether it's Google, Spotify, or Apple, that we're there as LegalAF. And the other way to promote it is for the Meidas Mighty and others to go on the MeidasTouch merchandise store and buy things from there that shows that you're a supporter and that you're a fan, including LegalAF short sleeve t-shirts and long sleeve t-shirts and coffee mugs. And these are the ways that you can, people are like, how do we promote the show? How do we, we want to keep you on the air. We want to keep you doing what you're doing. We love what you're doing. This is the way to do it. And it helps. It helps with the algorithms. It helps us get highly ranked and highly rated and makes us come back each week, twice a week, along with all the hot takes and trending takes that Ben and I do during the week. So Karen, last word before we see each other again next Wednesday. What do you got?
I just can't believe how much news comes out every single day. Breaking, right? We might have to do a special breaking news at some point,
And we did.
So it's great.
And just to compliment you and the MeidasTouch Network, we have broken stories that nobody else has had and had guests on that nobody else has had in real time, even before mainstream media. And that's because we're breaking through. We're using our contacts in the industry among our colleagues, and we're bringing it here, whether it's Robbie Kaplan, who came on the show. We'd like to get her back again to talk about all things Donald Trump and what she does with her law firm, or maybe one day, who knows, Carrie Dunn and Mark Pomerantz through Karen, or maybe Cy Vance, and then we had Alvin Breck. Who knows? But just everybody needs to understand that when we talk about this show, we don't just rip it out of a printer and get on here and start. We're talking about this show and how we can make it better, and the guests that we can bring on to just bring knowledge and transparent information in our analysis to people every day. Karen, me, Ben, the MeidasTouch brothers, the Meidas brothers, we talk every day and sometimes 4 or 5 times a day about how to bring amazing content to you. That's what we do for you. What you could do for us, listen, watch, subscribe, buy materials, buy t-shirts, and we'll see you on Saturday with Ben and me for the weekend edition of LegalAF, and again on Wednesday next week with my co-host and friend, Karen Friedman Agnifilo. Michael Popok signing off.
Bye-bye.